welcome to the last presentation of the event. That that isn't going to be given by you guys. So again, here's my little design model. Um, and now we're going to be talking about the bottom half. We're going to be imagining solutions in the abstract, and then we're going to be building solutions in the real world. So mindsets for imagining. Some people call it brainstorming or ideation or whatever. I like imagining. So, to start, aim for quantity over quality. There's no wrong idea. A lot of people, and this is actually a little controversial because the old like IDEO or Stanford D School kind of methods of brainstorming have actually kind of been scientifically disproven. So it actually is really valuable to kind of go into, they found the best way to get ideas is for everyone to kind of go separate, come with a bunch of ideas and then share. And then you kind of break apart and you come back together. So this is the iterative sessions of silent storming and sharing, where you end up building and being inspired by each other instead of just looking for agreement. So you want to keep an open mind. You want to encourage wild ideas. When you are sharing, when you are talking about ideas, be present. Only have one conversation at a time. Listen to what other people say. It's okay to like ask questions if you don't understand. Be like, oh, can you explain to me how you envision this working or how you see it working? But then build on the ideas. You're not critiquing the idea. You'll be prioritizing later. And of course, with everything, it's important to have fun. One more thing, and this is really simple, but one idea per sticky note. When you guys are doing this digitally or in person, if you just start making like a bullet list of ideas on one sticky note, you are going to run into trouble. So just put the name of the idea, if you need to, a little description, and then if you are visually inclined, a little diagram or quick sketch is useful. Again, this is kind of reiterating, one of the best ways to collaborate is to kind of have these iterative sessions where you imagine, you come up with a bunch of ideas, you share those ideas with each other, and then you go back and then you slowly build. And you come up with a lot of really good and unique and wild ideas this way. If you do want a tool, there's lots of them out here. I just grabbed Scamper. It just, we can make this available to you. But it's just a way to think about how you can change or modify something. You can eliminate stuff, you can reverse, it's ways to prompt lateral thinking or oblique thinking, which is a whole presentation on itself. But just thinking about different ways that you can tweak and modify a concept to create a second new concept. Once you have all your ideas, what you're going to be doing is you're going to be grouping similar ideas based on value or whatever kind of feels relevant at the time. You're going to identify as a team kind of your top concepts, which could be based on dot voting or some other filtering method. And then you can refine the ideas to prototype. I'll let your coaches kind of help you identify the top concepts. One way to down select is through this. You can kind of place some of your ideas on the ease to impact chart and just kind of look for things, in the upper right corner. If it'll have a big impact and it's something you can actually do, like why not go for those quick wins? Okay, moving into prototyping. There's basically 3 reasons that you would prototype. The first one is to understand an existing experience. Like if you want to empathize with a problem or that someone else is having, like, I think an example I heard was people who had a pacemaker and they wanted, people who didn't have heart issues to kind of understand what it was like. So this is a really old example. They gave people pagers and they basically had it set. So, if they received a page, they would have to basically stop whatever they were doing and be like, what would have happened if you would have just had a heart attack right then? Like they're like, oh, I was carrying groceries, I was driving a car, I was holding my grandchild. Like it would have been terrifying to like lose motor control in that moment. So this is like prototyping an experience in order to build empathy. This is a fun little chart. So like, we did, we were talking about generative versus evaluative research. So this is prototype can also be a form of research, right? So, explicit, if someone knows, like, hey, what's your favorite color? Blue, you can just ask them. Sometimes it's a little bit more difficult. Like, how do you ride a bicycle? They're like, well, I can't really explain it, but like, I can show you, right? So in that case, you're learning through observations. People might not even be aware themselves of what they're doing or why they're doing it. And then if you really want to get at like deep-seated needs, you can use prototypes. I can give you an example of something, of a new experience, and you can respond to that. You wouldn't know it. Like if I asked you, you wouldn't know if you liked it or not. You kind of have to experience it to know. So that's kind of the first one. The second one is to explore design ideas. As a team, you can build prototypes and use them on yourselves or use them on other people as a way to like say, oh, is this a good idea? Is this a bad idea? And you kind of figure it out. So I love this quote: "A prototype's an early version of a thing that allows you to test your assumptions and get input on how to improve your idea." These are all like how they prototyped the one of the original PlayStation controllers. Putting it in your hands, feeling it, seeing what it feels like. Another thing just to be aware of, prototypes is not building towards the end result. It's not like, oh, I just test the wheel, then I'll just test the chassis, right? You want to like test movement at different ways. So try to focus in on what is the thing that you're trying to build, and then what's kind of the MVP, like the minimum viable version of that thing. A wheel by itself isn't useful, but a skateboard is. And the third way that people use prototypes is to communicate a design concept. So basically, if you have an idea, and you've created it, and now you want to like sell it or help someone understand why it's valuable, you can like create a prototype and let them experience it firsthand, and they'll say, "Oh, now I get it." So there's kind of different ways that you can build prototypes. There's a looks like kind of prototype, and I feel like some of these people are familiar. This is a DC Service Jam slide. Love it. Works like, so you can kind of explain how it would work, with a storyboard or moving characters or Legos. There's a storyboard. And then a feels like, you can actually try to create a version of a thing that someone can hold and touch and interact with and see how that works for them. I love this quote as well. What I hear, I forget. What I see, I remember. But what I do, I understand. And this really gets to the value of why you should be creating and building and sharing experience prototypes. This is an old slide, so I forgot that I had so many funny transition effects. But there are some guidelines for building prototypes. Keep it simple, silly. Try to steer the focus of the feedback. Aim for quantity. Test one thing at a time and avoid the presentation trap, because obviously a presentation is not a prototype. If you're just showing someone your idea and then they just say, oh yeah, that sounds cool, like that's not a prototype. This is a really great example of a prototype that we're not going to watch for the sake of time, but basically this guy wants to test an app that'll scare someone, and he's basically like, I don't know how I could build this, it'll take months and development and this and that. And so this guy in green borrows the phone and is like, hey, let me put in some information. And while the guy's typing in his email, he like jumps from behind the phone and yells and scares him. And it's like, it literally took 30 seconds for him to prototype the experience of like, would a scary iPhone app be valuable or not? And then he's like, yeah, would you pay 95 cents to do that to your friends? He's like, yeah, of course I would. He's like, there you go. You've just, validated your first prototype. No coding required. Extra credit. So this is not something we're going to require anyone to do in the jam today, but if you want to try doing it, personally, I think if you want to go with a prototype, normally the jam is very prototype centric, but a lot of people have never built blueprints. And if you really want to have that experience, I think there's probably nothing wrong with maybe some people building a prototype and some building a blueprint. It's really like what you want to get out of the jam. So I threw in some extra slides around the blueprint. If you remember, this is the haircut journey that I showed earlier today. And this is just, simple. This is the customer's experience over time. And hopefully that makes sense to people. But if you want to turn it into a blueprint, and this is weird, but right? So this is now the customer's experience over time. You don't see the same levels of, emotional ups and downs in the same way, but it's basically, this is their experience. And we call this the swim lane. And then above it will often, same thing, you have the phases still. I don't know if you see my mouse pointer, but you have the phases of the journey. You have the customer's experience in the top, and then often you'll have the props, the physical or digital things that the customer interacts with. Then you have what we call a line of interaction, which is usually dashed to show that it's permeable, to show that interactions can happen through it. And then you have the front of house or front stage. Wow, this is old. I use different terminology now, but that's okay. You have the front stage interactions, which would normally be, in a restaurant, that would be your server or the host, maybe the busboy. But these are the people that you're going to be interacting with. And so you can see like, what are their processes? What are they doing? Where are their interactions? In this case, it's a haircut. So it's, their interaction with the stylist. And then you have the line of visibility. So these are things that the customer doesn't interact with, doesn't see. In a restaurant, again, this would be the cooks or the people who take out the trash. So in this case, you might have the manager of the salon, or things that the stylist themselves is doing in the background, out of the vision of the customer. Preparing the stalls or the supplies, managing their schedule, cleaning things in the background after they leave. These are all important for the service to still be provided. And then finally, you have the support interactions, which are also kind of dashed. And these are the technologies and the partnerships that the service provider utilizes and needs in order to provide, again, the great service to their customers. So this is kind of rough. This is very high level, but this is basically a service blueprint. And if you wanted to build one of these, to kind of show what your service is and kind of how it would work and who are the actors who would be involved and how they'd interact with each other, I think that's a really valuable exercise. And you'll have, some amount of time, I think 40 minutes to an hour to build it. So I think that's it. I love Miss Frizzle, if you ever watched The Magic School Bus. So when you're building prototypes, take chances, make mistakes, get messy. And that's the end of my presentation.
Awesome. Actually, Zainab has a question, and I also wanted to ask you on the blueprint. You said there's some terminology that you no longer use. Are there any terms that we should know of that you can give us an example of the old terms, the new terms? That might be helpful.
Not so much. I think I started thinking front of house and back of house is very much like kind of a restaurant thing, but I think a lot of people now like to, and I'm one of them, really like to think about it as a performance in some ways. So you have front stage and backstage, but they're basically interchangeable.
Okay. Zainab has a great question. Can you give recommendations on how to test a service blueprint?
Recommendations of how to test a service blueprint? Sure. So, it depends on what you're using the blueprint for. Very similar to the experience prototype, you can use it as a way to document, when you're doing research. There have been projects that I've done where we use the blueprint to help us as designers understand everything that's happening in the service. There are times where we've used a blueprint as a way to, in our heads, we're like, okay, we're creating a new service. How would it work? And we're using the blueprint as basically a way to make sure we're not missing anything, right? We're building it out and saying like, okay, this is how all the pieces would work together. And then finally, we can use a blueprint to present. So I had a client where we actually used the same blueprint, but we kind of evolved it. So we started with their current version. And then by the end, we were like, and this is how we think it should work. And so that allowed all the people who were part of that service to come in and see like, oh, this is me, this is me, this is me. And they could see how they were all related to each other and how that flow of, I don't know, energy, like, the information, how it went from one provider or one person to another in order to all support that customer's experience. I hope that answered your question. I might have gone on a little tangent though.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. I'm not looking at the chat, so if there are other questions, please keep throwing them at me.
And Beth said you could use body storming to act it out.
Yeah. So sadly,
how do you feel about body storming?
This is a really sad part of COVID and being so digital. There's so many amazing examples of experience prototypes that happen in person, where you actually will like mock up. I mean, on a high end, I know Continuum at one point basically built a hospital room in their office so they could mock up different experiences and try to see how it would feel like to be laying in that bed while these other things were happening over you, right? So that's, a very high fidelity experience prototype, but you can do really low fidelity ones as well. And yeah, a lot of, especially as a service designer, because there's this push for, what's the lived experience. Being able to do those things in person is super valuable.
Awesome. Any other questions? Any other terms that somebody might need clarified?
Again, I'll make the decks available if anyone wants a reference. I'm going to put them all up on SlideShare, and we'll put some links to you.
Okay. And actually, if you wanted to slide up, not slide up, but if you wanted to scroll up in the chat, Mel gave a great explanation of the prototype, the room prototype. I think might have in your presentation there was a cardboard box, and she gave a really good. Should I just read it? I could just read it. Mel said, no, the cardboard idea was a culturally themed escape room prototype where you have to engage with some action from that culture to progress through that room. If anybody was confused, that's what it was.
Shout out to Beth, who actually was on the team that made that.
Yeah.
See, this is what happens. This is when you have OG service designers, service jammers in the room. We have historical references.